for is that, again, we can argue when it happened, right? But that the flood of Noah did occur, that there was a perfect world, again, perfect meaning robust, meaning it was optimal for life. There was a catastrophic event that reshaped our world, and that everything that survived or that we see on the earth now is simply descendants of those creatures, including us. We're descendants. That's all we are. We're the survivors. That, and then of course that we then live in a paranormal world, a world full of angels and demons, and those are just, it's an entire ecosystem of very different creatures, right? Yeah. We think, oh, angels, women with wings, and demons, men with red horns. That ain't what this is, right? That's right. Yeah, that's pop culture gobbledygook. This is an entire ecosystem of very different creatures, all with different abilities, different zones of influence and agendas. So it's like, as far as I'm concerned, that matches what we see, right? Yeah. Creatures that are everything that we see today, we have in the fossil record. They're just smaller. Heck, I'm a Texan. The 9-banded armadillo, which actually come from South America, they're just, they're just this big, right? Maybe this big. Yeah. They used to be the size of a Volkswagen Beetle.
Yeah.
They are smaller. And okay, to Wild Bill's point, there have been a number of massive events in human, that people, and everyone records them. But every ancient culture says, look, there was an event. There was one very catastrophic event that wipes everything out and reshapes it. And then there were definitely other cataclysms after that point. Mm-hmm. But there was one thing that just reshapes the earth. And that's the earth that we see. This is why we have animals in areas that we don't. It's like we have marsupials in America, and we have marsupials in Australia. Ain't nothing in between.
Yeah.
Right. And again, everything we have now has a much larger, much more robust, healthier predecessor in the fossil record. And even the fossil record itself calls a lot of assumptions that we make into question. Why do we have dinosaur bones in which they have active hemoglobin, soft tissue? These are things that have a known decay rate.
Yeah.
If you were to put something in a perfectly climate-controlled environment, right, hemoglobin, just put it in there after 1 million, and this is the most generous number anyone's ever had, 1 million years, perfectly climate-controlled, no raising temperatures. It's the optimal conditions. In 1 million years, that thing's just dust. And yet, 1 million years, that's 1,000 sets of 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. And yet, we have bones that are supposed to be 70 million years old that have active hemoglobin that we can check and say, oh, look, they're related to chickens because the antigens respond to them. That I'm sorry, that it doesn't just beg credulity. It's that, any theory that this is 70 million years old is blown out of the water by the fact that we can reactivate the soft tissue. The fact that we have dinosaur mummies where their skin and scales have been perfectly preserved. That means fossilization doesn't take millions of years, or that wouldn't be there. This is something that happens very, very quickly.
See, I know that they found like mammoths in the ice, and that obviously preserves their skin and fur and stuff like that. But in the deserts and stuff like that, where they're pulling out dinosaur bones, that wouldn't make much sense.
Well, and again, things change, right? As far as times, but to the point is, okay, well, if it was frozen by some cataclysm, something happened to freeze, let's say a dinosaur, but then it still has to be fossilized. Like fossilization can't take millions of years if these creatures still have their skin. If we still have internal organs sometimes with these mummies. It's not just the bones that are often the bones are the easiest thing to mineralize, but we have soft tissues that mineralize, and we have them. This is an indication that there was a catastrophic event that whatever killed this thing also fossilized it, and that it wasn't 70 million years ago because we have hemoglobin.
Yeah,
this was in the order of thousands of years. Was it 6? Was it 4,000, 7,000, 15? I don't care on that, right? Because the discrepancy between 4,000, 7, 15,000, the discrepancy between that and 70 million, we're not even in the same restaurant, These are, you're in another country somewhere. Like the worldview that we are presented with doesn't line up with what we actually see. We would expect, if, again, the overall biblical narrative to be true, that all the creatures today would simply be smaller versions or lesser versions of what we see in the fossil record. That's what we see. And we would expect them to be wildly diverse to meet this new environment, but you could see that they're all related. That's what we see. You would also expect to see a few things that don't belong, that didn't adapt fully, right? That are unique and weren't terribly successful. Well, we call those things dragons. We called them dragons 200 years ago. Now we call them dinosaurs. And then when they show up, we're like, nope, nothing to see here.
Yeah. It does beg to differ, like where they actually come from, the sightings that you've, you said about at the beginning of the show. I do. There was a program on Netflix, I think it was, called Le Bray.
Yeah.
Something like that, where in the story, a sinkhole opened up. The people that fell through it was like in 65 million years BC, amongst all the dinosaurs and stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think that could be a possibility?
I don't have a problem with time travel per se, right? Like some sort of, the world is the truth is always stranger than fiction. It just tends to be a lot less dramatic.
Well, right? maybe not time travel, but even in like stories like Journey to the Center of the Earth,
right?
Something where it's giant, not dinosaurs as such, but giant creatures, giant animals that would have been around in the prehistoric period, and they've just been caught in this bubble where they've just lived perfectly happy for the last 65 million years. And evolved from there, because they wouldn't have been affected by any asteroid hitting the planet, because they were safe in their bubbles. Right? You think that could be one of your possible explanations?
Is it an explanation? Sure, absolutely. My problem is that it's the preponderance of the evidence, right? Let's go again, going back to the bones themselves, right? It's the record that we have of these creatures is the fossil one. Well, okay, what does the fossil record indicate? The fossil record indicates rapid fossilization. And again, if we still have their hemoglobin and soft tissue, then it didn't happen 70 million years ago. Right? Whatever this was happened within a few thousand years. Let's go out and say, let's get wild. 20,000 years ago. Great. That ain't 70 million. Because we wouldn't have their hemoglobin. Right. We wouldn't have those things. But again, are there areas where, that have been large? Yeah, the Congo, right? Mokele and Mbembe, which people have seen for decades, and they've described as a sauropod for decades. There's even another one whose name I cannot pronounce. It starts with an N. It's essentially, it's a ceratopsian, right? It's described as a ceratopsian, not as a rhinoceros. They're like, no, we know what a rhinoceros is. We know what these things are. This ain't them. This is something else. And I think we have them all over Papua New Guinea. Again, you've got all kinds of things in Papua New Guinea that aren't supposed to be there, right? Again, like the living pterosaur, the ropin. So the idea that there's something out there that, where they've been hiding, I think is exactly what's happened, because our planet has suffered, again, multiple climatic changes over the last 6,000 years. We've got this recorded. But the problem is, them being perfectly fine for 65 million years and unchanged for 65 million years doesn't really work, right? How do we wipe everything out and get all these fossils and still have them bopping around fundamentally unchanged after 70 million years? That doesn't really work. The hidden land, or the savage land from Marvel Comics. that doesn't really work if you've got 70 million years of them, suffering through these things. But if they only had to be around for a few thousand years, and they just didn't, they just weren't, they didn't adapt as fully as as the mammals did, then you've got something that works. It's like, okay. And again, if the creatures who were fossilized quickly in a climactic event, then again, that explains fossilization and why we still can access their DNA, why we can still take Tyrannosaurus hemoglobin, test it against chicken antigens and have it respond. That's how we know they're related. It's like, there's not 70 million years worth of time between that critter getting buried and us getting it. There's only thousands of years for that.
I mean, you're not the only one that I've heard recently talk about the time span being wrong or off in some way. I was watching another documentary on streaming service, and they were talking about when the humans were on the Earth, and they were saying the scientists, the archaeologists have said it's like during this period, but it seems like from what his research and looked into old temples that are built on temples, and it actually the human race goes back a lot further than what actually is suggested.
Or we're more advanced in the past than we give ourselves credit for often. And so this is one of those things. The reason I was going to become an archaeologist, and I realized there's one specific class. Essentially, they showed you how to fake a finding. That wasn't how it was presented, but it's what they were saying. Essentially, when you find data that doesn't comply with the mainstream narrative, like, this is how you hide it, so you still have a job.
Yeah.
And I realized very quickly the stuff I wanted to look into, I wasn't going to be allowed to look into. So my life took a slightly different tack. But the fact of the matter is, we have people who have, written papers and dissertations and all these things. And it's like, okay, this is the history of just the Americas, right?
Yeah.
And yet you go and you talk to, First Nations people, they're like, yeah, that ain't what happened here, right? These things occurred. And what do modern archaeologists do? They just wipe it all. It was like, nope, that didn't happen. That's mythology. It's lore. It's whatever. It's not what really happened. There's a First Nations and archaeologist I want to talk to. His whole point is there is no such thing as the Clovis culture. That instead of having these different cultures that span thousands of years or tens of thousands of years, he's like, no, these were just different tribes making different tools. That we don't have. In essentially, I liken the whole thing to a library that was closed, right? Like, imagine an old school library. We walk in and there's books everywhere. Some are open, some are on tables, some are on the floor. We have to decide, was there an earthquake that just took the books off and put them in places? Or is this the byproduct of people coming in and just doing research in this library?
Yeah.
We have to have a conversation about that. But imagine the person who says, no, it was an earthquake, shuts up everyone who disagrees with them, and then takes all the time. So like, well, if it was an earthquake, why do we have books that would clearly have come from different parts of the library all stacked in an order?
Yeah.
Why do we have them turn to specific pages in this book over here in the books associated with it are on the same topic? That indicates that this wasn't random. And they take that and say, nope, you don't get to talk about that. You don't get to present it. No one gets to hear about it. That's the world that we live in. You can find papers where academics were like, yeah, there are probably dinosaurs still around in the early 1900s. But by World War I, everything was shut down because the modern Darwinian mainstream view was very, very popular amongst certain global elites, where they're like, you know what? We like this idea. We like this theory. We like this idea. This gets the money. And anyone who says, hey, I don't think this is a right idea, you become a florist.
Yeah.
And that's not a random job pool. There's an archaeologist working in the Americas. She was actually working. She was an American archaeologist. She was about to get tenure. She did a dig in Mexico, found stuff that doesn't comport with the modern narrative.
Yeah.
And she's like, no, I'm